Okay, when you think of Madison Square Garden, what comes to mind? Probably a Knicks game, right? Or maybe some huge concert. But what if I told you about an event there that was so shocking it's almost been scrubbed from our history books? We're going to dive into a story that proves, right in the heart of America, the unthinkable really can happen. In fact, it did. So let's set the scene. The year is 1939. Over in Europe, war is on the horizon. But right here in New York City, it's a cold February night. And get this, it's just 2 days before George Washington's birthday. Thousands of people are flocking to a rally. And what's it being called? A pro-Americanism rally. Sounds pretty patriotic, right? And when I say thousands, I mean thousands. We're talking more than 20,000 people. They packed Madison Square Garden to the rafters. So let's be clear, this was not some tiny fringe meeting in a dark basement. No, this was a massive event, a full-blown spectacle in one of the most famous arenas in the entire country. But here's where it gets really, really unsettling. Imagine walking into that arena. You look at the stage, and what do you see? A giant 30-foot-tall portrait of George Washington. Okay, makes sense for a pro-Americanism rally. But then you look to either side of him, and there they are. Huge, unmistakable swastikas. Yeah, flanking the first American president. So what on earth was going on that night? Let's break it down, looking at what was happening both inside and outside the garden. Okay, so inside, you've got this rally. But outside, it was absolute chaos. 100,000 counter-protesters flooded the streets. The city had to call in the largest police force for a single event in its history just to contain it. Inside, things kicked off with the Star-Spangled Banner, but the tone changed fast. The speeches were this toxic brew of American patriotism and anti-Semitic, anti-communist hate. They were praising George Washington one minute and Adolf Hitler the next. And then, right in the middle of the final speech, one lone man. He just rushes the stage. So who was this guy? Was he some big-shot politician, a military hero? Nope. His name was Isidore Greenbaum. He was a 26-year-old plumbing assistant from Brooklyn, just a regular guy. And as he stood there listening to them attack his religion, he couldn't take it. He felt like he had to do something. So he rushes the stage, and immediately he's swarmed by the rally's security. They beat him up, right there on stage in front of all 20,000 people, and then the police arrested him. When he was asked about it years later, Greenbaum's explanation was pretty simple. He said, "I lost my head." Hearing all that hate, he felt like it was his duty to speak up. And what was the price for that moment of defiance? A $25 fine. That's it. You've got to be wondering, right? Who are these people who could actually pull this off? Who could fill Madison Square Garden with thousands of Nazi sympathizers? Well, they were a group called the German American Bund. So the German American Bund was a pro-Hitler group here in the US, and they had the signature move. Their whole strategy was to wrap Nazi ideology in the American flag. It was bizarre. They'd wave Old Glory right next to a swastika banner. They'd praise George Washington and Adolf Hitler in the very same speech. And they had two main goals. The first was to Nazify the German-American community, to build a solid base of support there. But their second goal was even bigger. They wanted to sell the new Germany to the entire American public, to make Nazi ideas seem, well, not so bad. Now here's the wild part. You'd think a group like this would be brought down by public outrage, right? Or maybe the government would step in. Nope, the Bund completely fell apart because its leader, a guy named Fritz Kuhn, got busted for embezzlement. He stole over $14,000 from the group, some of it right from the rally we're talking about, and spent it on his mistress. So, in the end, it wasn't ideology that killed the Bund. It was just plain old corruption. Okay, so this rally, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The 1930s were a really anxious time in America, and people, especially artists, were trying to make sense of it all. In fact, just a few years before this whole thing at the Garden, a novelist wrote a story that was, well, it was chillingly ahead of its time. The book was It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. It came out in 1935 and was a massive bestseller. And why? Because it dared to imagine the one thing most Americans thought could never, ever happen, a fascist takeover of the United States. And the plot, man, does it sound familiar. You've got this charismatic, populist leader. His name is Buzz Windrip. He wins the presidency by promising to make the country great again and to help out the forgotten man. But as soon as he's in power, he sets up his own private army, cracks down on the press, and starts tearing down democratic institutions one by one. And this character, Buzz Windrip, he wasn't just pulled out of thin air. Sinclair Lewis actually based him on a real person. The incredibly popular and incredibly controversial governor of Louisiana, Huey the Kingfish Long. Long's populist message and his Share Our Wealth program had made him a huge political force. Okay, so we've got a real event, this rally, and a fictional story from a novel, and they're both pointing to the same scary thing. To really get what was going on, both then and now, we need to call it what it is: fascism. The historian Robert Paxton has a really useful definition. He says that fascism isn't just an idea, it's a type of political behavior. And it's fueled by this obsessive feeling that the community is falling apart, that your group is a victim. The solution it offers? This intense, almost spiritual demand for unity, energy, and purity. And there's a pretty clear playbook for how it comes to power. First, it makes up this amazing, mythic past, the good old days. Then it bombards people with propaganda and disinformation. It's all about emotion, not reason. It singles out an enemy to blame for everything, and this is key, it often rises with the help, or at least the quiet consent, of the established elites. And boom, that brings us right back to that rally in Madison Square Garden. Think about it. Putting a giant picture of George Washington, a hero from America's mythic past, right next to a swastika, that was the playbook in action. The Bund was trying to make their hateful ideas look patriotic by literally wrapping them in the American flag. You know, it's really important to get this one thing straight. Fascism isn't exactly the same as authoritarianism. Think of it this way. An authoritarian ruler just wants everyone to shut up and stay home. They want a quiet, obedient public. But a fascist leader? They need the exact opposite. They crave the big rallies, the political theater, the roar of an excited crowd. They feed off that energy. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Why are we talking about something from the 1930s today? Well, because these stories are like a warning bell from history. They show us the patterns, the red flags to watch out for. See, this kind of thing almost never happens overnight with some big dramatic coup. It's more like a slow creep. It starts with a charismatic reader who says, "I alone can fix it." Then step 2, they divide people by creating an us and a them. Step 3, they go after the truth itself. They attack the free press, they call everything fake news. And once they have enough people behind them, that's when they make their final move. They start dismantling the democratic institutions. Okay, so how do you fight back against that? Well, the defense is basically the mirror opposite of the attack. It's about promoting education and real critical thinking. It means we have to actively call out and fight disinformation. We can't ever let political violence become normalized. We have to stand with any groups that are being targeted. Really, it all boils down to staying informed and staying engaged. When you look at the whole picture, the shocking rally in 1939, that prophetic novel, the quiet courage of a guy like Isidore Greenbaum, it all really leaves us with one big question. We all say that democracy isn't a spectator sport, right? So what does that actually look like? What does it really mean for you and me to be vigilant in a democracy today?